Sorry if this is hard to follow. I'm working on some drawings that should help explain the logistics of my experience. It was springtime of 2007. My then boyfriend and I were on our way from New York down to Miami, heading towards a music festival. We were driving south on the highway, along the east coast of Central Florida, when we pulled into a rest area so he could catch a nap. He'd been driving all day when he decided that he desperately needed a short rest. We had very recently bought the van, and he did not think that I could handle maneuvering it, so he was doing all the driving. I later would prove him wrong. He parked, jumped in the back of the van, and lay down on the futon mattress that we had laid there. He told me to leave him alone, and proceeded to pass out from sheer exhaustion. I was pretty freaked. The rest area building was unmanned, locked up, and rather dark. The restrooms were closed. The small rest area building was surrounded by dark woods. There were about 4 other cars in the small parking lot, but no sign of any drivers. I imagine they were having an emergency laydown as well. Normally, I would never have set foot outside of the van alone in such a scenario. In fact, my instincts told me not to get out of the van. But I had taken some Midol for my menstrual cramps, and they had given me brutal nausea. I needed some pretzels. I mustered up all my courage, opened the passenger side door, and squeezed through the space between our vehicle and the vehicle that was parked directly next to ours. As soon as I had a clear line of sight to the front of the rest stop building, I saw the thing. Saw it clearly. Straight ahead, I saw the brightly lit front facade of the rest stop. To the left of the doors was this thing. To the right of the doors was a vending machine. Immediately, it communicated with me. I was flooded with what I consider telepathic messages from this being. I cannot be seen. I cannot be seen. I must travel by night and exist in darkness. I cannot be seen, I cannot be seen, I cannot be seen. And I felt an enormous wave of compassion for the being, rather than fear, which might seem more like a logical reaction to somebody hearing this story. For some reason, my brain only categorized it as one thing initially, an outsider, worthy of compassion and tolerance. Its skin was pure chalk white. Not the skin tone white, the color white. Its eyes were several times larger than ours, and it had 2 little air holes for a nose, and a very thin mouth. Its frame being completely concealed by its enormous, long, black hooded robe. It looked as though it was quite gaunt underneath. Pretty frail looking, actually. It was sitting on its bottom, knees bent, back against the brick front of the rest area, to the left of the front doors of the rest area. It was sitting with its back very straight, tall and erect. It seemed in awe of me, or maybe in awe that I was actually approaching it. It looked vaguely like a human, very vaguely. Its face was snake-like. Its eyes were right on me. I threw a little everyday smile in its direction, and then I did something strange. I continued to walk toward the rest area, even after seeing this thing. I walked towards the rest area building, closer to it. I walked forward, about 20 feet from the rear of the van to the rest stop area, up the 20 or so steps, and to the right, where the vending machine was located. My thoughts at this point were very bizarre in retrospect. I felt bad for this thing. I didn't want it to feel different. I know that sounds hilariously quaint, if we were indeed talking about an interdimensional being, but I did not want to run back into the van. I didn't want to hurt this thing's feelings. I didn't want to make it feel like a freak. It had already told me that it could not be seen due to the way people would react. So I wanted it to know that I didn't judge it for the way it looked, and that I'd be willing to come to terms with its horrific appearance in order to extend some humanity to it. I did not know about fallen angels and such at the time. It was with the very bizarre strong conviction to be righteous and humane to this thing that I walked toward the vending machine, got pretzels. I'm telling you, my stomach was churning. I used the vending machine with my back to it, Snyder's in hand. I swiveled around to look at it again before descending back down the steps. It was at that moment that pure terror rippled through me. I was closer to it now, approximately 15 feet away, and I could see now that there was definitely no way that it was human. It was staring right at me, like a wide-eyed insect. It was still exactly in the same position, except for that it had turned its head to look at me, as my position had now changed. It looked like an alien, or like a demon. It was not human. Its huge, one-dimensional eyes, were they totally black? I'm not sure, but I know that it did not have whites in its eyes. They were almond-shaped, like the classic alien eye that we all know too well. It was then that I realized that it was extremely tall, unthinkably tall. Although I was standing and it sitting, its head stood taller than mine, and its huge eyes were fixed on me, totally, with fascination, alarm, and with the most intense focus, just like the way my cat looks at something right before she pounces. When I made the decision to climb the stairs towards it, and not to retreat to the van, I thought that it was sitting on top of something, and that was why its head was raised up so high. Now, from this closer perspective, I could see that it was not sitting on anything but its own rear end. If I had realized it was this tall at the start, I very well may not have gone up the stairs. So, after the ripple of terror went through me, I responded by simply smiling, the way you smile at a stranger when your eyes catch on the bus. I shot at a casual, thin, innocuous little, "Hey, how you doing?" smile. Why, and how I acted as if things were totally normal, I cannot explain. I have never acted so cool in my life. You know, there's a Seinfeld episode where Elaine says that one of the reasons that she is a decent person is because when I see freaks in the street, I never ever stare at them, and yet I'm careful not to look away because I want to make the freaks feel comfortable. So that's actually what was going through my mind, believe it or not. If I were to guess what the thing was doing when I encountered it, judging by its body language, I would say that it was somewhat displaced and resting. I have no clue. Maybe it was in the middle of something far more sinister. It did not look like a mutant or an experiment. It looked ancient, timeless, placeless, graceful, and horrible. It was also firmly in this dimension when I saw it. It was not a hazy vision in the slightest. The lighting was not dim. It was not even a remotely ethereal experience. The extremely bright lights that illuminated the front facade of the rest of the area building revealed every contour of this entity. If only I had ever been closer, I could have provided much more detail about its facial features. As I was walking back to the van, I strategized about how to make sure that my fear did not paralyze me and prohibit me from getting safely inside. So, I decided not to look back, or even around me as I turned the key. If I saw that it had moved, or I saw it coming towards me, I would have been too terrified to manage the car keys. I got in the van, locked the door. I screamed that we needed to leave immediately, and we did. As we drove away, about 90 seconds after it was lost in my sight, I looked out the window and saw that this thing, this entity or being, was gone. There was nothing where it had been, just brick wall and concrete floor. Whatever it was, I saw a giant, humanoid snake-faced being with chalk-white skin, wearing a black robe, sitting at a rest stop in Florida in the middle of the night back in 2007. It communicated with me telepathically. I am not crazy and I consider myself a very discerning person. I was driving alone in a national park, very far from people, on a bright full moon night. Huge clear moon, the kind of moonlight you can read by. The road went straight along the bottom of a wide, flat, mostly barren valley, then banked up and sharply left onto the ridge. It was about 10 p.m., and I drove through the valley on full alert, watching for animals, loving the scenery in crazy bright moonlight. When I hit the curve and went into that sharp uphill left, I saw something through my side window. White thing. It was rapidly getting larger in my peripheral, as though it had been moving parallel to me. But the turn in the road meant I was now in its path. So I turned my head, looked directly. It was white. Man-shaped, but without genitalia, and naked. A deathly nauseating white, with a greasy shine, completely hairless. It was crawling, on its hands and knees, but it was half the size of the car, and it was coming so very, very fast. It appeared to have a very rubbery face, distorted by hate, or a scream. Black eyes that reflected the moonlight. The look on its face, I can't even tell you. I could still make myself feel sick from the memory. I believed that it was intelligent, that it wanted to tear me apart with its teeth. The speed it possessed was horrifying. It went from being a small white spot to spitting distance in the time it took to make that turn. When I unfroze myself and hit the gas, it was on the road. I braced for it to run into my car door. Then it was gone. The rearview mirror showed me nothing. I have never told anybody. I have seen a few minor glitchy, ghosty things over my many years, but nothing has ever frightened me like that. It was looking at me, and I don't know what it was. I can't seem to find any reference to anything like it, and I would like to know if this thing is known to folklore. If anywhere else would be better to ask, just say. Also, I looked into the whole skinwalker and Wendigo idea, and it's a case of almost but not quite. Are skinwalkers ever seen without skins? Then maybe. Can Wendigos be stocky instead of skinny? Then maybe. I am most intrigued by the Massachusetts story. Also, while I describe it as screaming, that's just the look on its face. I heard nothing. No sound. This happened in Newfoundland. Newfoundlanders have no trouble telling ghost stories, and a lot of them believe in fairies. But I've not heard of a creature like this before. As for the bear idea, Newfoundland has only black bears. Hell, I even tried to tell myself it was a badly lost wet polar bear. But when I say the thing was crawling, I mean I could see its legs, below the knee. It was very close to it by the end, and it kind of resembled a crawling man. I spent a lot of time in that area, and encouraged storytelling in the bar, but nothing like this ever got mentioned. As I said, I never told this story either. The degree of fear involved somehow put it in its own category, as if it would be very, very bad luck to speak of it, because it had seen me too. I never thought I believed in them, but I think it was a demon. Let me first say that I've only ever told this to 3 people in my life, for fear of them calling me crazy. Almost 5 years ago now, I was fishing at my grandma's pasture. She owns several hundred acres in the south-central Kansas area. Where I was fishing, there's a small dam and a waterfall in a fairly wooded area. It was just now getting dark, and I had walked the creek, and my vehicle being a good mile away. I was almost finished when I hooked a decent bass. I brought it in, and as I was throwing him back, something caught my eye across the creek. There stood a creature. It stood only 4 foot tall at max, and it was gray pale, almost looked sickly. The best way I can describe it was like a hairless cat, and very skinny, and yet impressive human-like body. The creature was looking directly at me, like I messed up, and I should not be seeing him. His head rocked side to side, almost like it was dancing. I slowly reached for my fillet knife, making sure not to take my eyes off of this thing. I felt threatened by whatever this was. I get my knife in hand, and it lets out a sound that I have never heard before, and hope to never hear again. It was loud, and very high-pitched. Then it takes off into the woods. I've never seen that again, but others have told me about lights they see down there, but I've never shared my story, for fear of being ridiculed. I now carry a gun with me wherever I fish. Thanks for reading. Apologies. This is kind of a long one. One night, me and two friends were all walking around at night in the fields around a small town in Michigan. Our destination was a junkyard, tucked away behind several fields, a home to rusted-out cars, semi-trailers, farm equipment, etc. We were cutting through the fields to avoid the trigger-happy farmers that happened to live around there. Just about there, and we were foiled by a stream too wide to leap. It was now late autumn, and wet feet would be very uncomfortable. So, we backtrack into the adjacent field. From our corner of the field, there was a tree line that ran east to west, and southward, the land rose into a large hill. We stood for a moment, discussing our options, when my eyes were drawn to a large white boulder, seeming to glow a bit in the moonlight. It was around 75 yards away, and I was idly staring at it when it moved. It unfolded, standing up, a 10 to 12 foot bipedal being, skeletal thin, pure white, long limbs. For the space of a second, it looked over at us. Then it took off. I think it was running, but it may have been gliding, possibly flying. I'm honestly unsure. It crosses the field, up over the hill, a distance of probably 100 yards, in a few seconds, in complete silence, and was gone. Only two of the three of us saw it. After a few minutes of incoherent gibbering, we tried to rationalize, explain, figure out what it was we just saw. We decided it must be an alien. A year later, I was at a party, and the subject of aliens came up. So I say, I've seen an alien. And they're like, yeah, let me guess. In Saranac, right? I confirm. We exchange mutual looks of awe, and he directs me to this Eric fellow who grew up in said town. Eric is telling me that he has seen strange things there his whole life. Lights in the sky, but no humanoid beings. Fast forward another year and a half or so, and I get a phone call from an acquaintance who was sitting at work when he noticed a girl staring at him strangely. She eventually walks up to him, says, "I feel like I need to talk to you." She proceeds to tell him that her dad's friend is the head of a vampire clan in a town. My friend remembers the story about weird things in that area and asks her if she knows anything about Saranac. She gets very defensive, eventually reveals that that town is a breeding ground for dragons. Yeah, to this day I'm not certain if I saw a dragon, an alien, or a vampire. But after doing a bit of poking around, and I heard from a girl that lived there as a kid, that she had seen a random 15-foot scorch marks on roadsides and in the middle of fields. I should begin by saying I'm a painfully rational creature. Nothing even remotely like this has happened to me before or since. At the time this occurred, about 3 years ago, my dad's place was located very near my work. So, I would travel down this particular stretch of road pretty much every day. It was a well-lit road leading into the downtown area of a very small city. The river lay on my right, going to my dad's house this particular evening, wending along, dotted by some rather nice properties. I had been driving along, actually singing along to old songs on the radio. I was in fine spirits, going to see my father. While the road wasn't deserted, there were a few cars along it at the time. All of a sudden, stopping me cold, I feel this wave of emotion crash over me. Fear and grief, and a desire to scream slamming into me like a physical car crash. Time seemed to slow for a moment, the way it does during a surge of adrenaline, and I saw, not 3 feet from my right wheel, something tall, impossibly thin, and absolutely dark. But it moved. It turned, and I caught just the slightest glimpse of something. A face. I could make out what looked like a beak, short and bent, protruding from beneath a hood. And a word for a millisecond, one word, rang in my head very loudly, more like a title than a feeling. Dread. I continued to watch. Time still stretched thin as I passed it, my passenger side mirror coming dangerously close, and as I turned to get a better glance, it was gone. The street lamps had not altered once, had shone right where I saw it. I ran the details over and over in my mind, actually turned the car around to examine the spot. My heart was pounding, and I had to turn off the radio. I was covered in goose pimples, but there was nothing there. No tree or post or any other viable explanation to account for what I saw. It honestly felt as real as anything I've ever felt. It felt as though, for a brief moment, another consciousness touched mine to make its presence known. And I'll be honest, it felt odd. This one is about seeing a shadow person. I did not know that's what it was called until much later. I was living in a house in Laguna Beach that had been there well since the 1920s. In its history, it had been a speakeasy, a brothel, and a house for smuggling illegal immigrants. One day, my new wife and I were having an argument. I can't even recall what it was about. She walked down the block to get a cup of coffee and cool off, so that left me alone in the house. The way the place was built was incredibly haphazard. There was a bedroom and living room on one side, and then a bathroom with 2 entrances. On the other side of the bathroom was a hallway that had windows on one side and 2 bedrooms on the other. From my bedroom, I could look across the hall into the bathroom, then through the bathroom and down the other hall. I was standing at my dresser, and I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. I looked down there. There was, honest to God, this gives me goosebumps just typing it, 17 years later, a black figure. It was maybe 3 feet tall, and was only vaguely humanoid. It kind of looked like black scribbles, like somebody had scribbled a human shape, but the scribbles moved, like electricity arcing. That's the best way I can describe it. There was no sound that I could remember. I do remember when I saw it, I wasn't afraid, just like, what am I looking at? Then, it noticed me looking at it. I can't say it turned around. It just focused on me, I guess. Then I was scared. I didn't move, didn't scream, nothing. I was just frozen, because it just came at me. It rushed down the hall towards me. I have no idea what it intended, but as soon as it entered the bathroom, the door closest to me just slammed shut on it. I screamed, yelled for my wife. She wasn't home. I went outside, into the daylight, did not go back in until she got home, about 10 or so minutes later. Normally, I don't believe in ghosts, so I don't believe I saw something supernatural. But I know I saw something. I don't know what it was. I'm not going to give out personal info because I haven't lived there in nearly 20 years now. But if you're ever in Laguna, check out the blue ramshackle apartments down the street from the Whole Foods and near Cafe Zinc. It's the place with ivy covers gate. Second, my wife reminded me that I did not in fact run outside. She found me still standing at the dresser, with a shirt on but no pants. Because people were having a hard time visualizing the layout of the apartment, it was a very run-down one. At one point, the floor under our clawfoot bathtub rotted out and cracked through the floor while I was in it. So, I've shared my story a few times, multiple times now, and whenever somebody asks what the creepiest thing to have happened to them is, it might look very familiar, but here it is. When I was 16, I would jump on my trampoline out back for literally hours every night. Literally. I would just listen to my iPod and daydream to get away from a rough family life. One night, when I was jumping, a kid ran past our fence, full speed, carrying a box about the size and shape of a skateboard. He ran to the park behind my house, held it by the edge, and tossed it into the air so that it flipped a few times before landing on the ground. At this point, I was a little weirded out. He was just standing over it, staring for a pretty long time. Then, out of nowhere, he just bolts full speed back past our fence, like he did not even notice I was there. Alright, that's a bit weird. I just keep jumping and staring at where the box was. Here's where it gets creepy. The box looked like it was moving. Then, something started to rise out of it. I actually stopped jumping and rubbed my eyes. Watched as what looked like a full-grown man rose out of a box that was like 2 inches thick. He had an elongated head, no hair. His skin was orange, and his eyes were huge and pitch black. He raised one arm up to his side, and the box just kind of went into what I can only describe as a trench coat. He walked over to the only pavilion we have at the small park, grabbed the metal beam holding up the overhang, and started to bang his head hard onto the beam, over and over. At this point, I had rubbed my eyes quite a few times and could not even move. I had no idea what I was seeing. Without warning, he just stopped, and his head quickly whipped around and stared right at me. It was like he could feel I was watching him. A giant, and I mean giant, smile came across his face as those dark eyes just stared at me. He tilted his head back and forth a few times. Oh man, I had goosebumps, and my eyes started to tear up. Even typing this making my hair stand on edge, because I won't ever forget that look. As I was about to start crying, and I don't know why I wanted to cry, but his face just filled me with terror. He turned around and kind of phased down the road, off in the distance. Phase like those units the Protoss have in StarCraft that leave a trail of themselves for a short period of time, if that helps at all to explain it. He was gone, and that was it. I bawled my eyes out, sprinted inside, and called my best friend, who just assured me I was seeing things and needed to calm down. I'm sure I sounded insane. I mean, who would believe me? But this is the creepiest thing that has ever happened to me. I know what I saw, and to this day, when I think about it, even my eyes begin to water, and my hair stands on edge. Never saw anything like it since. I thought I'd share my experience to see if anyone else has also experienced something like this, or know what it might have been. As to this day, I can't find anything similar. This happened about a decade ago, when I was just a teenager. My family and I moved onto a country property. It was small acreage, paddock, on the side of the house, bordering on dense bush and forest. No other houses were nearby. Anyway, I would go out, around 9ish in the evening, to give my horse a last feed, pat and brush, and check that he wasn't cold. He was the first horse I ever had, so I was very fond of hanging out with him. Anyway, for 2 nights in a row, this owl just suddenly turned up and would be sitting on the clothesline, really close to where I would stand with the horse. It would just stare intensely at me the whole time, not even fly off, though I would literally be within inches of it. Not even the huge sensor spotlight at the driveway nearby would freak it out enough. Then, it would come up on the light of the whole house and paddock periodically, depending on where we moved around in that spot. I thought it was peculiar with the owl, but that was about it, until now, in hindsight. Anyway, on the 3rd night, it was there again, but did eventually fly off halfway through me feeding the horse. I stood there, stroking my horse in the glow of the faint interior garage light for about 10 minutes, just taking in the night, when my mom came out from behind me where the garage side doorway was to see how I was doing. As we started talking to her 3 chihuahuas, and my bull terrier ran out to the middle of the paddock for a sniff. As they ran past the first paddock fence, they set off the sensor spotlight. We kept talking for a minute, when my mom, being slightly elevated above me, and the horse in the garage looked puzzled over the horse towards the back of the paddock, saying, "What is that?" The paddock, towards the back, became incredibly steep, with our water tank sitting on the high side as it descended down to the other side of the paddock, bush and road. I must add, all my animals, the horse, the dogs, were very sensitive to movement and strangers. If the dogs saw anything suddenly start moving fast out of nowhere, they would have definitely chased it and barked at it aggressively. Anyway, I stepped out in front of my horse with my mom, moved towards the fence to see a white figure hunched over beside the water tank, as if suspiciously out of the water that had overflowed. At first, from the position it was, I thought it might be a large kangaroo, but as me and my mum leaned on the fence to get a closer look, with the light shining brightly, it suddenly turned its face over its shoulder and looked at us, realizing we were watching it. We realized in that second it was a very humanish face, but were both frozen in shock at what it possibly was. Next, it suddenly turned around, went from being this maybe hunched over animal to a giant, slender figure, taller than the water tank, and shaped like a humanoid man, with a long face, mouth, and eyes, white all over, no hair, long arms. However, what was really odd was it was wearing a baggy, huge white t-shirt, which hung past its waist. No other clothing. It stared at us for a second, standing straight up, and then quickly hunched over low to the ground again, and began running down the steep hill, across the borderline of the paddock and bush, just like on all fours, down the hill, except instead of its hands touching the ground, they just went side to side, like someone normally running or walking. Even though it was hunched, its back was dead straight, in that angle, and its neck and head kept smoothly turning over its shoulder, looking at us as it ran as fast as possible. Even as it disappeared into the bushes, where you couldn't see it, you could still hear it smashing through. All the while, our dogs did not bark or acknowledge anything had happened, even though this thing had ran right across in front of them. Neither did the horse budge to the loud smashing noises of it in the bush. Me and my mom, suffice to say, bolted quickly back into the houses, freaked out at what we had seen. After that, I stopped hanging out at night alone with the horse. The main things that still get to me most about that sighting was the out-of-place t-shirt, how it ran so fast and such an impossible angle and against gravity, all while managing to twist its head at us and the dogs ignoring it. So, my question, what do you think it might have been? Have you heard or seen anything similar to my experience? My friend worked at the Harrah's Casino in Maricopa, Arizona. Anyone familiar with the area knows that this particular casino is out in the middle of nowhere on Native American reservation. Anyway, my friend is a normal, emotionally stable white guy who is an atheist. He was working late, around 3 a.m. on the casino floor. He's naturally a night owl, so he was wide awake, and this was his normal shift. He's not a druggie, or anybody to make up BS stories. So, here he is, in this empty casino, walking into the vacant men's bathroom on the opposite side of the casino floor. He walks in and does his business in the urinal, turns around to go wash his hands when he notices somebody standing at the sink, staring into the mirror. He thinks to himself, "That's strange, I didn't even hear anybody walk in." He gets a little closer to the sink, about 5 rows down, and begins washing his hands. He glances over again to realize it was not a man that was standing at the sink, but a woman in a red dress. Right when he is about to say something about her using the wrong restroom, this woman turns her head slowly towards him, and he just stares at her, kind of in disbelief, thinking this chick must be drunk or blind to not realize that she was in the wrong bathroom. As her head slowly turns, her eyes were a dark, glowing red. He described it as red eyes you would get when taking a photo of somebody. He freaked out, doesn't know what is happening, and looks down to notice she doesn't have any legs. Instead, she has what he described as the bottom half of a deer for legs. She was walking on hooves. Anyway, as this thing turns toward him, it starts to move and act aggressively. My friend ran out of the bathroom, obviously scared to death. He had his buddy review the surveillance tape of that area around the bathroom, but all that was seen was him going into the bathroom, then him running out. He may have experienced this. No one is going to believe me, but this happened when I was 17. I'm now 32. I graduated high school, got my first apartment. Nice town. Lived by myself, other than my cat, Snowball. Don't laugh. I named her when I was only 8. A few details here before we really get started. I've never been a fan of cat boxes. The worst part of being a cat owner, shoveling tiny poop with a tiny shovel every day. So, I got one of those motion-activated self-scooping deals, left it on the back patio, ran the cord inside to power it, and left the back sliding door open, big enough for her to get in and out. 5 or 6 inches. The patio was one of those 8x8 cement floor types, surrounded by a 5-foot-tall wall wooden fence. If you looked out from my bedroom door, you'd be facing right at the sliding door, with hanging blinds. Living room in between. Kitchen that was off to the right. So I'm playing some 56K Counter-Strike at my computer in my room, my back facing the door. It's about midnight, 1 a.m. I hear Snowball start to make one of those awful cat growling noises in the back of her throat. I'm pretty locked into my game, so I just tell her to knock it off, not even looking at her. She keeps doing it. Now I tell her to shut up. I'm irritated because I'm doing well in the round, but she gets loud. This is enough to break my concentration from my gaming zone, and I realize this is not normal. I get it from my computer and see her standing in the doorway facing out, her back to me. She is full-on Halloween cat mode, her hair sticking straight out, her back completely arched. She looks tense. I'd never seen her that way. She is still just going crazy. I look out into the living room where she is facing. Nothing is amiss. There is nothing there. I look down at her to say something to the effect of, "What's the matter?" She makes this insane sound, like a combination of a hiss, growl, spit, and she starts to take a few steps backward. That is when a tiny creature runs out of the flipping kitchen, on 2 legs, wearing a tattered piece of cloth or a bag. It looked like a little cloak. It's maybe a foot tall, maybe a foot and a half. A real-life jump scare. The cat jumps backward, about 3 feet in the air. I jump. I glance down at her as she does this, but quickly look back up. I hear her land with a crash behind me and run, and I'm fixated on the thing. It is moving, but it's like time has slowed down. I'm watching these things happen, but everything is so fast. It runs out the back door through the blinds with a crash at speeds that don't even seem natural. The blinds are swinging, and now I'm just standing there, dumbfounded. What did I just see? I'm staring at the back patio, at the swinging blinds. I'm not moving. My eyes begin to notice that something is wrong. All the blinds are softly swinging, except the 2 closest to the opening. I see they're making an inverted V. I look at them and follow them down to the very bottom, and between them is when I see it. Its head is poking through the blinds, staring at me. It had yellowish eyes, and a face that I can only describe as bestial. Gray, greenish, blackish skin. At this point, a singular loud thought fills my mind. You aren't supposed to see this. And at the conclusion of that thought, every one of the hanging blinds shoots upward and outward. I jump up again, and my heart tries to blast out of my chest, like I'm flipping Cape Canaveral. Some of them hitting the ceiling. A few fall off. It's a loud racket. The rest are all swinging all over the place. I look at the place where its face was, and it's now gone. So I beeline for the kitchen. The refrigerator door is open. I open a drawer, grab the biggest knife I see. I'm shaking. Adrenaline like I have never experienced in my life. I rush to the sliding door and slam it shut. Now it won't close. I open it a bit, slam it back shut. Still won't close. I'm completely stupid. The cat box cord. I crouch down, brandishing this knife like a complete idiot, looking out the glass door, waiting for this thing to launch at my face. So I'm shaking. I reach across myself with my left hand to the power plug on the wall to the right as I'm staring out, waiting to stab anything that approaches. I fumble to get it unplugged. My hands won't do anything right. Finally, I get the cord unplugged, and I open the door real quick to throw the cord outside. I throw it like a spaz, and it hits the wall and the side of the door and falls down. Still inside. I pick it up, try this again, but this time, it successfully lands outside. I hear a scratching sound, and my eyes dart up. I see 2 tiny, awful hands holding onto the fence. Clawed, gnarly, humanoid hands. This thing climbed down feet first, hanging from the fence. It would have been slightly comical if it wasn't so terrifying. The hands let go, and I hear it land in the bushes outside the fence, and footsteps run off as fast as it can. So I slam the door and lock it. This is completely true. I've heard it all. It was a raccoon. It was a cat with mange trapped in a paper bag. It was neither of those things. After the event, I began researching like madmen. The closest thing I found was in a book I found in the library called Fairies, which is like an art book featuring all the different types of Irish folk creatures. I don't live in Ireland. I live on the US and the West Coast. Look, you don't believe the story. I don't blame you. It sounds ridiculous. You probably shouldn't believe it. I hate the whole no sleep thing. It's stupid. I hate BS paranormal stories, and believe it or not, I am a skeptic. I believe all people that have experienced something strange or believe in the paranormal should be a skeptic. I enjoy debunking paranormal videos and pictures. I want the truth. Was I hallucinating? It is entirely possible. I had an extreme and sudden hallucination. It's not unheard of. This event has had a huge impact on my life and completely affected the way I view the world, the paranormal, and even religion. Everything.